There's the cat. And then how can I see where people are? Oh, right there. And then there's the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can close the door.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cold. Okay, so we're going to test this here. If you guys can tell me if you can see the typing that I'm about to write. It just says hi. So Annalisa, I see you. If you are here joining live, if you could just like type hi or hello or something, just so I know who is all here. That would be helpful before we start. Perfect. Annalisa said she can see it. Great. Emily, I see ya. And there's a couple others. So I'm just having everyone go and say hello if you are joining us right now, so I can see all who is here before we get started. And in case you have not done so yet, on your Schoology, there is a link for a Google document that has all your questions, or all the questions that we're going to be going over today, for you to take notes. So it is similar to going over chapter 2, I believe. But the difference is that you are going to be uploading this as a separate assignment. You're not going to be just adding this to your notes. Your notes have already been graded. It's already done. You don't need to worry about it anymore. This one is going to say Q&A. And actually, I realized right now, talking to you guys, that it says Ruth chapter 1 Q&A. That is not correct. It is Ruth chapter 3. So if you've already copied and pasted into a new document, go ahead and change that. That was my mistake at the top. It should say Ruth chapter 3. We are going to go over those questions that were taken from the ones that you guys asked. And then that is going to be due tomorrow at 3 p.m. to upload those. But hopefully we'll get them all done right now while we're going through this together. You don't need to use complete sentences, obviously. You're just taking notes, but try to be as thorough as you can. If I go too fast, please tell me to slow down. I can get excited, as you know, but I'm trying really hard to slow down my talking when we're doing stuff like this. So just like the other chapters, what we're going to do today is we're going to read through chapter 3 together. I'm going to try not to pause or anything before we get through it, hopefully. And then we're going to go over your questions. As we go over the questions, if something is still confusing, make sure you ask in the text box. And I have this little fun thing over here, that I can type if I need to spell something for you guys. So it makes it a lot easier. So right now you should have your notes out with your computer, and you should have your Bibles as well. I was reading from the NASB before. This is an ESV version. You can obviously follow along on Bible Gateway too. So we are going to get started now. So that we are in Ruth chapter 3. Very interesting chapter. Lots of questions. Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor is what my Bible says for the title. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it if you guys can read along with me. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she's just trusting Naomi at this point with this these very strange instructions. Verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. I love, in my version, there's an exclamation point there. The author of this is funny. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you've not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." He said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. So literally like in her dress. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but settle the matter today. But will settle the matter today." Okay, there's a lot there. Do you think it's funny that every single time Ruth sees Boaz, he makes her go home with a bunch of food for Naomi? I think that that's cute. So you guys had some really good questions here. A lot of your questions were similar and completely understandable. So we're going to go through them now. Verse 1, I think there were 2 questions here, but you guys, I asked you to give explanation for why you asked the questions when you're reading the chapter and making observations, just so I can understand what angle you're coming from. Someone might ask a question, but the reason that they're asking might be vastly different from the reason someone else asks the question. So for me to be able to answer it correctly, kind of need to know what angle you're coming at it from. So that's why these questions on your notes look longer. So verse 1, was Naomi preparing to die, or in knowledge of the coming of it in her old age? For she states that she must find protection now, meaning that she might possibly just be preparing for her death and incapable, I think, of housing and mothering Ruth. And then the other question about verse 1 just says it's kind of puzzling. Naomi says to Ruth, "Should I not seek rest for you that I may be well with you?" Not really sure what this means. So the first person is asking, does this have to do with Naomi thinking that she's going to die? And so she has to like find rest for Ruth. So if the person had just asked, was Naomi preparing to die? I would just say, I don't think so. But she gave context. So that is actually a fair question, because she does say, "Should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you?" But here, no, this is not implying that Naomi is going to die. So you want that in your notes. She's not implying that. What she is talking about, my head keeps getting cut off. What Naomi is talking about is finding permanent rest for Ruth. Their current situation is not a good permanent solution. Just going into the fields every single day, getting, barley and hoping that someone's going to be nice. Obviously, Boaz has been super nice, but that whole process is not going to go well for them. They don't really have a means of doing anything else except for getting food, relying on the kindness of neighbors, which again, this is the time of the judges. Not everyone was actually very kind and following God's laws and caring for one another and helping the poor. Like, that wasn't really happening. So that really is something that Naomi's considering. She's realizing this is not going to continue to go really great. We need to find another solution. The very next sentence she says, "Is not Boaz our relative?" So she's implying, hey, we really should get on this. We know he's a relative. We know that we are in a situation where a kinsman redeemer, that whole process. I'm actually going to have you guys take notes on that. That is called this. It's called a levirate marriage. That term comes from the tribe of Levi. I'm not sure like the actual historical context of that term, besides that it's from the tribe of Levi in the Old Testament, but it does refer to that concept we've talked about before, where a relative would marry the wife of someone, the brother or something like that, for the land to stay in the family, for the name to stay in the family, for the brother, not for themselves. Question, do our notes need to be in a different color? Yes. Well, I mean, I prefer that. Your notes need to be in a different color from the original questions, but since there were no original questions on what I just gave you, then yes. Always, 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 they need to be in a different color. It can be very confusing to read otherwise. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question. So, Naomi is thinking about this concept. Okay, if this is a man of God, that means he actually cares about God's commands. We should probably call on this concept of levirate marriage, and maybe he will be willing to be that rest, be that permanent solution for Ruth, which is why she brings up Boaz in the very next sentence. So that's what verse 1 means when she's talking about seeking rest. She's preparing Ruth on how to essentially ask Boaz to to do this, the traditional Hebrew way of the law of the kinsman redeemer. And that's what this whole chapter is about. So before we keep going, any more questions? The definition of levirate marriage, let me get, I could try to explain it, but I could probably give you a better definition. Maybe. But in this context, it has to do with a relative of a person who has passed away. So a widow, she is unable to provide for herself. She is unable to produce sons because she's not married. She now is kind of just left floating in the world, uncared for, and, could really starve to death or be taken over. And so it is the responsibility of other men in the family, traditionally unmarried men, to take this woman and marry her and produce sons on the behalf of the dead brother. So that is what that means. Let me see. Okay, yeah. The levirate marriage is the type of marriage in which the brother of a deceased man is obliged to marry his brother's widow. Yeah. So I know that sounds super weird. It's not something we're used to. I talked about this in another one of the live stream videos. But it had to do with family. It had to do with loyalty. It had to do with staying in the promises of God. And it was a lot better life for a woman to be taken care of rather than all right, well, your husband's dead. We don't care about you now. Bye. Good luck in life. It's not like she could go get a good job. So this was actually a very loving act. No, you do not need to have your answers in complete sentences. Definitely not. They just need to be thorough. So if there's something you need repeated or I need to slow down, just let me know. So, yeah, there you go. Oh, and I was wrong. It's not from the tribe of Levi. The levirate is from the Latin word levir, meaning husband's brother. There you go. I stand corrected. Okay, so there you go. So that's what it has to do with. I keep looking over in the corner, but that's not the camera. Okay, so hopefully that answers question number 1. Now I gotta go back and find there. Okay, cool. So verses 2 to 3, they're talking about the threshing floor and winnowing barley and stuff. Someone asked, is it a harvesting term? Yes, it is a harvesting term. So we got gleaning in the fields. And then we have, I think I'm going in the correct order, gleaning in the fields. And then you go to the next process, I think, is threshing. There's a 3 process step. Okay. There we go. So yeah, it goes from you go in the fields, you glean, you get all the grain and things like that, and then you do the threshing. So you're beating the crop against a stone to separate the grains from the stalk, and then winnowing is the process of separating the husk from the seeds. So there's these husks and then the seeds, and you blow air and you use the wind to carry away when you blow a dandelion and they all fly away because they're so light, the wind just carries them off. That's how it is when you're doing the winnowing process. And so the threshing floor is where this process happens, where the threshing happens, beating the stalks against the stone and then using the wind to carry. So it was there's a floor, but then it was not an enclosed space. So because you had to use the wind to be able to come through and take away the chaff, so that the seeds would then fall, because the seeds are heavier and the seeds are what you need to make bread and things like that. So then they would fall down on the floor and then you pick them up and use them for food. So that was that whole process. We don't really see that too much. We just go to the store and buy bread. So that's those questions. 2 through 3, they are harvesting terms. Not super important, but kind of interesting. That's what he's doing. That's what Boaz is doing on the threshing floor. He's with all his dudes, all of his men. I kind of actually like that, so that might be worth noting. The fact that he's there and he owns the fields. He just could be up in his room and making them do it, but he's down there in the festivities, finishing this process. And then they're eating and drinking together and hanging out, all the workers who are now taking what they've gleaned and they're getting the stuff to make the food. So it's kind of neat that he's down there with them. Okay, so any questions on threshing, winnowing, all that stuff that's going on there? I would try to draw a picture, but I can only type, and that would be really bad. It would not look very good. Okay, so verse 3. In verse 3, again, Naomi is trying to explain to Ruth what to do to see if Boaz can help him out here. She says, wash and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down the threshing floor. Okay. So anoint yourself. Why does Ruth need to anoint herself before going to see Boaz? In the Bible, when people are anointed, doesn't it usually have a holy meaning? Yes, it does. Anoint yourself could potentially mean just put on perfume. I think some versions might say that. I have ESV, so it does say anoint yourself. Anoint yourself with oil traditionally meant, kind of clean yourself up, but it also did, yes, mean that there's something holy going on. This kind of could go either way. Like, yeah, she's wanting to like look nice and probably smell nice for Boaz for what is about to go down. But the anointing too, like she is kind of about to do a holy thing. She's calling upon Boaz to fulfill the commands of the levirate marriage that he knows about from being a actually God-fearing man as opposed to some other people in the land. And so, yeah, I mean, I would not be hard pressed to think that it's not something of that nature, that's why she's anointed with oil. But I think some versions might actually just say perfume, so it's not super important, but good job picking up on that if your version did say oil, because she is going to go perform a ritual asking Boaz to do something that has to do with God's commands for his people, which I would say is a holy act in itself. So that actually makes sense. Okay, we are like a third ish of the way done, I think. So we're on to verse 4, which is like, you guys had the most questions for verse 4 because it's so weird and so not anything we're used to, in this century, generation, in our time now. But before we go on to verse 4 and what the heck is going on there with the feet uncovering and laying down and stuff, any questions on verses 1 through 3 for now? I will just wait for a second. And I got 9 of you guys in here. Okay. So we are moving on to verse 4. I'm going to read it first before we go to it. Okay, so again, this is still Naomi talking. She's giving Ruth instructions on what to do. But when he lies down, he being Boaz, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. So, translated, Naomi is telling her, go do this, and these weird instructions. Uncover his feet. Go. So, like, go kind of low-key spy on him. Find out where he's sleeping. Go to that place where he's sleeping. Again, it's not like she can't get in there. It's not like, it's an enclosed space under lock and key. It's an open area. So she can go over there, find out where he's going to go lay down, then go over to that place, uncover his feet. When it says uncover his feet, it means literally uncover his feet. Like, take his blanket or cloak or whatever he has covering himself and uncover his feet. So that's what she's asking him to do. Then she says lay down. And then Naomi is convinced that Boaz will know what this action means because she says specifically, he will tell you what to do. So she's convinced that this is going to actually spark something in his mind of knowing what's going on. He's not going to be confused. Even if maybe Ruth is a little confused about what Naomi's saying, Naomi believes Boaz is not going to be confused by this action. So I think you guys are answering each other's questions. We are going by the questions, but the questions are the verses, and we're going by the verses that you asked questions about. So hopefully that makes sense. So on to your questions about this process, about verse 4. Hopefully I answered that question. I think someone asked, like, how do you uncover someone's feet? By uncovering their feet. So whatever they have covering their feet, you uncover it. That's what she did. So the question, why does Ruth need to observe the place that he lies? Because she's going to go and perform this ritual. What does that even mean? Why did Ruth have to uncover his feet and then lie down? Was this some sort of ritual at the time? A humble way of asking to be provided for? A big fat yes. Good job. That is exactly what she is doing. Another person asked, what was the significance of uncovering the feet of Boaz? Lots of significance. I'll give you guys some more specifics in a second. Why did Ruth's mother tell her to lie next to Boaz and uncover his feet? Okay, so these are all basically the same question. Yes, it is a ritual for asking something. I think I talked about, does literally mean uncover. Laying down next to his uncovered feet then is like saying, I want you to cover me with your protection, your faithfulness, your provision. It is not actually a coincidence. And somewhere in chapter in 2, I think it's Yeah, there it is. Chapter 2, verse 12. Okay. So it is not a coincidence that this terminology of like covering and like wings of covering and refuge, that's all connected. So when Boaz and Ruth meet in chapter 2, Boaz says to her, "The Lord will pay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Yeah, he is acknowledging that she is coming to take refuge under the God of Israel. Well, God is going to give her that refuge in Boaz. In Boaz's, I can't say words. In the fact that Boaz even exists. That's what I'm trying to say. And what he can do. So, yeah, she is asking Boaz to cover her in that sense. So, that's why when Ruth answered, Boaz is, "Who are you?" So when this happens, we're going in verse... Where does this start? Okay, so yeah, she goes and does this, lays down at his feet, and at midnight, the man was startled. Also, maybe his feet were cold and he woke up. That happens to me. And then, behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." That's all it says that she said. And he just magically knew what this meant. He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter." Again, calls her my daughter, which is a sign of respect and care. "You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." And then he goes on to say, "I will do that all that you ask." She didn't say here, "Please marry me, please take care of me." She didn't have to. By telling him that he is a redeemer, all of that is implied. He knows what that means. Also, he's not an idiot. He probably already might have known this, maybe not. I mean, I don't know if he knows who Naomi is for sure. So maybe he understands that, or that's implied. But, it's also implied that he's a little bit older, which is why he makes the comment that you didn't try to go find other people. You didn't try to go woo someone else. You wanted to have me be your redeemer. And we'll talk about why Ruth would want to do that in a second. Why she would want to go with Boaz when it does seem that he's a little bit older. Yeah, Boaz did not flip out finding a lady there once he knew why. He knew exactly what she was doing and what she was asking, and he seems to be pleased by that. So that is all of verse 4, and if I go any farther, I think I'll be answering, more of verse 5. So before we move on, since that's the most important thing, are there any questions about what Ruth was doing going to Boaz? There's some later questions about, like, why would she go in the middle of the night, or, like, when she wants someone else, or things like that. We'll get to that in a second. But any questions about, like, what that action actually was, what she was asking of him, before we move on? I'll wait for a quick second. Repeat why he was pleased again. Okay. In verse 10, he says that this kindness, so he's referring to Ruth asking Boaz to redeem her as a kindness. He views that as a good thing, apparently, in that she didn't go after young men, whether poor or rich, that she is actually following this levirate marriage and wanting her husband's name to not be blotted out from the earth, which is something that they believed. She wanted to provide a son for her husband. She wanted to follow the commands of the God of Israel. Boaz picks up on that. She's not just like, "I'm a hot young woman and I'm going to go try to woo some guy." Not even that she could successfully do that again, because like we've talked about, it's not like that was really common. She could try, I guess. And so Boaz is acknowledging the fact that she is obeying the commands of the God of Israel and trusting him. So he seems pleased in the fact that he seems interested. I mean, like, he says, "I will do all that you ask." His first response to her, when she's essentially asking, "Will you be my redeemer?" which means that he's going to have to care for her and provide for her and Naomi and all this stuff. Thank you, husband. He is aware that that is a huge financial burden for him to take on. But instead of, like, being weird about it, being like, why are you asking me? Or, like, I don't know, whatever. His first response is, "May you be blessed by the Lord." And he responds that this is a kindness. So he is pleased by this. Just the fact that he responds to her like that. And then he goes on to say, "I will do it. There is someone nearer than I, but if he doesn't want to be a redeemer, I will do that." So he seems very eager to. So that's why I said he seems pleased by it, by all of his words surrounding her, asking him to do that for her. And we will talk about what he means by there's a near person in a second. So, okay. I appreciate this next question about verse 5 because we are living in 2020, not in BC times. And so some of this feels a little bit weird. Not something that would be normal for us. So the person asks, is Ruth doing this to honor Naomi? Like this whole process. Isn't a redeemer a counterfeit God? Nope. I don't know what that means. Isn't a redeemer no. Redeemer is a term for this process of, like we talked about, redeeming being buying something back or setting free by paying a price. So Boaz redeeming Naomi and Ruth is to set them free by paying the price of providing for them. So they're free to live their lives. They're not imprisoned by poverty anymore. That's what it means to redeem. At another time, during another assignment, there will be questions for you guys about parallels between Boaz being a redeemer to Ruth and Jesus being our redeemer. So just checking. Like an idol. No, definitely not an idol. It is a good thing. It is a good thing, like loyalty between a husband and wife is a good thing. Or, I don't know, any other like godly type of relationship. So yeah, it's not a God for God, not an idol. If you have more questions on that, make sure that you ask, because I'm a little confused where that connection might have come from. This is a very good thing. It is a good process. And it's a godly process. Okay. So is Ruth doing this to honor Naomi, or does Ruth even want to do this? It seems odd that Ruth would agree to do this, knowing what it entails if she did not feel an emotional connection to Boaz. Okay, so again, I want to be fair to this question because we're used to, well, I'm not going to marry this guy unless I have an emotional connection to him. I totally get that. But we have to remember that time was so different from ours. Her husband died. She had no way of having a stable life for the rest of her life. People often didn't even marry for love in this time. I mean, in fact, it was quite rare, and it didn't even look like the love that we see on the movie screens or hear about in songs or might experience. Like, especially for someone who is in a Jewish community, they view love mostly the way that God defines love. Like, probably have a much healthier view of what love actually is than what we have of what we think love is. True love is selflessness, truly. And even when we look back in the Bible, like the stories where people seem obsessively in love with someone, I can think of a couple examples you guys can put in the chat box if you think of any other ones, like Jacob and Rachel, and how well that went for Jacob. Nope. Obviously, we've talked about that because of counterfeit gods. And then Samson and Delilah also did not go well for him, if you guys know that story. So anytime we've seen that type of like lusty love or like, having super strong feelings for someone in that type of way, it hasn't really gone well. That doesn't mean you can't have feelings for someone, but it means that your love is not rooted in how they make you feel. It's rooted in selflessness and care and loyalty and faithfulness and provision, and stability and all those things that actually make a life good, not just like make someone feel good in the moment. So knowing what we know about Boaz and knowing what we know about Ruth, when you have one person who loves godly qualities, they're trying to exemplify that in their life. They are trying to follow the person of God and have a relationship with him and obey him and honor him and trust him. And then you have another person who's functioning that way. And they are both looking to this God to guide them and lead them into his plan. And then they meet each other, and then they see this. I mean, you can just read in the text them talking to each other. It's very clear they like really admire each other, respect each other. They constantly are invoking the name of God in their conversations. Boaz does that constantly. Ruth did that from chapter 1. So if you're Ruth and you're seeing how this guy is treating you, comparatively to probably a lot of people at the time, again, who were not following the law, there is a high chance Ruth did have some type of affection for him, if not just respect and admiration. And honestly, like, whether or not she thinks he's hot, that did not really matter at the time. When it comes to having a fulfilling life that's stable and happy and going to produce a family, like, and be protected and cared for in a real way, like, she knew that she could trust Boaz, and that's way more important. than whether or not she thinks he's cute or he's young. And that is actually something we can relate to in 2020. Truly, like, what's the point of having a super hot husband if you don't trust him? If he doesn't care about you, if he's abusive, if he ignores you, like if he's rude. Boaz is not any of those things. Boaz is actually following God in a time where so many, even the Israelites, were not following God. He's like a diamond in the rough, and she's aware of that. And I think Boaz seems to think the same thing about Ruth. I mean, to see what she has done, how she came from her homeland to follow the God of Israel, be with Naomi, not give up on her, not forsake her, show her faithfulness. Like, she believed God would show faithfulness to them. Like, this is a pretty freaking beautiful story, and it's only 4 chapters. It's pretty neat. So yeah, Ruth is definitely interested. We see that in her words. Maybe he's a little older, but honestly, she's like, yeah, this guy is the real deal. He's already treated her with so much kindness, and never asked for anything back, and that's a pretty big deal. So that's what we can assume about that. But that is a fair question, and I'm actually glad that person asked that question so we could talk about it and what would be important to Ruth in a husband. Okay, so now because we're not necessarily going verse by verse, but there's a couple things I want you guys to know. The next question you asked was about verse 11. Sammy, I appreciate your amen there. I agree. We already talked about Boaz's response to her and that he is interested. So now we get to verse 11. Ooh, excuse me. The question is the only way Boaz helps Ruth... Okay, I should have edited that question. I'm sorry. Is the only way that Boaz can help Ruth, basically, is to marry her, or is there something more he could do? Okay, the only way for him to help her permanently, yes, would be to marry her and then inherit the land. Then they can use that and provide for Naomi too. He could continue to just keep giving them food, but that's not really all that helpful. It's like, you've heard the term, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Like, inviting Ruth to become his family is providing for her forever. And then Naomi is part of Ruth's family too, so then he would be taking in Naomi as well. Not only that he'd be providing for both of them, but it is the only way for him to show true honor and faithfulness in this levirate marriage concept to his kinsman, which was Elimelech, which is Naomi's dead husband. And so for him to actually, perform that duty, he does need to marry Ruth. Because not only is he providing for Ruth and Naomi, he is showing respect and honor to the name of Elimelech and Kilian and Mahlon. So it's a completeness of, we are the family of God, we stick together, we don't give up on each other, we provide for each other, instead of just like, here's some food, here's some food, here's some food. So yeah, it is important that he would marry her and fulfill that whole entire covenant. Okay, that is verse 11. We get to verse 12. Okay, this is important. So why does the subject of another man come up when Ruth is already really into Boaz? See, I like that someone picked up on the fact that Ruth seems into Boaz. I would agree. And then a different person asked, is the man that is more closely related to Ruth than Boaz? I think the person meant Naomi. Yes, he is. That is what Boaz implies. So let's look at the text. He says, my daughter, I do not fear. I will do all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. I love that. I love that he just says that. Everyone knows you're awesome. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. That means there is someone in the land who is technically more closely related to Elimelech than Boaz. So we don't know if like Boaz is a second cousin or a cousin, and maybe this other guy is like some other closer cousin. I don't know. But he just implies this guy is first in line. I'm after him. We have to allow him the opportunity to say if he wants to marry you or not. And that's what he says. So he says if he will redeem you, good. He says good, because he knows that Ruth is going to be taken care of. But if he won't, then Boaz says, I will do that. It's kind of like if you're saying to someone that you care about, like, if you're happy, like, that's great. I'm happy for you. And you might really mean it, but deep down you're like, but I hope that I can have you. So he's kind of doing that. A little bit different than that, but there you go. Okay, Hannah asked, I thought they were talking about God. That was my question. Maybe if you can clarify, I'm not quite sure what you mean about talking about God. So for verse 12, just to clarify that this is a person who is more closely related to Naomi, specifically actually Elimelech, and he had to get the opportunity to be the redeemer first. And so that's the law. That's the law for this levirate marriage concept. This further shows Boaz's character, so that he wants to follow the law, not just like claim her for himself. He actually is saying, hey, we have to do this the right way. We can't, I can't just marry you even though I really want to. We have to check in with this guy first. He's trying to be a good dude. Okay, so that God knew. If there's a part in the text that you guys could point out where maybe it's a different translation that makes it seem like he's talking about God, or they wanted to wait for the word of God. No. So I would highly recommend, like, if you have a Bible, like looking at the little footnotes and things like that. When they're using this word redeemer, it's not capitalized. They're not talking about Jesus. This is Old Testament times. When they say the Lord, they mean God, the Lord of Israel, the God of Israel. So when they are saying this word redeemer, they're talking about this concept of kinsman redeemer. So that's why when Naomi refers to Boaz as a close relative, it's the same thing. So then Boaz says, yes, I would do all that you ask, but there's a guy closer than me. And so we kind of got to do it the right way. He has to get an opportunity to marry you first. So not capitalized equals not Jesus in some places. And again, just to be specific, there is no Jesus in this story. Jesus has not become a human yet. I believe in the Trinity. I believe that Jesus is always in existence. He's preeminent, pre-existing, but he is not a human person yet. So Jesus does not show up in the story. Jesus, however, is reflected in the story greatly with the whole Redeemer concept, and we will talk about that in a different assignment. So thank you guys for bringing that up. I'm so glad that you did, because I would definitely not want that to be confusing. No, God is using Boaz to provide for Naomi and Ruth through Boaz, and he says he will do it, but they got to ask this guy. And in chapter 4, we will understand like what that means, because they do encounter that guy, and his response is kind of funny, and then we'll see what happens. So there you go. So that, I think, answers number 12, verse 12. If there's any other questions on that concept, please ask. I want to make sure it's not confusing. This book is like straightforward in some ways, but then it's also confusing in these like specifics, and I don't want to just brush over them, because that's a really dumb way to read the Bible if we can't ask questions about it. So, okay. If not, we only got a couple left. Good job. Okay. I think we're on to verse 14. So Ruth did this. She lay at his feet until the morning, and then got up before anyone can recognize people. And then Boaz says, hey, don't let anyone know that a woman came. It just says, and he said. I don't know if he said it to her. It sounds like he was saying this to one of his guards or someone else, like, hey, don't say that a woman was here. So the question is, why was no one to know that a woman had come to the threshing floor? Would it have been viewed as inappropriate? If the custom of claiming the guardian redeemer was such, why would it be a big deal for someone to have seen that? And then the second question was, were women not allowed at the threshing floor, or does Boaz just want to protect Ruth? Okay, first of all, those are really good questions, by the way. First of all, yeah, it would look weird in a general sense, because these were all of the male workers. So if a woman was there, it would just be confusing. There would just be a lot of questions. Why was she there? A lot of questions and rumors and things like that. Yes, Boaz is trying to protect her. Now, was it inappropriate what occurred? No, there's no indication that there was anything inappropriate. Granted, Naomi was scheming a little bit. She wanted to get a jump on this. And so she was thinking, what would be the most like subtle way for her to do this so that she's not making a big scene, because she is a Moabite. She is not Jewish, but she's following the God of us. She's following the Hebrew God. So Naomi is probably doing her best to come up with this plan that is going to be the safest probably for Ruth to have this conversation with Boaz. And this is a way for, him to be able to tell her he wants to redeem her without it being even in a more creepy way. That was a very symbolic, very serious, very I don't know, like covenantal way of asking for him to be her redeemer. And so this was Naomi's idea, as we know. So yeah, he was just not wanting her to have any rumors circling around her. They could run around explaining to everyone, hey, she was just there doing the Levirate marriage ritual. But why would you want to do that? Not to mention the fact that there already is someone closer. So it would maybe look a little weird if they were trying to, if it got kind of like brought up that they were, talking about getting married or about Ruth having the covering of Boaz before this other guy gets the chance to do so. You don't want to, come across as maybe jumping the gun. And so Boaz is just trying to be wise and discerning. It's not secretive in the sense of like, oh no, we're doing something bad, we don't want people to know. It's just there's some things that you do that is just discerning not to go run around and tell people. You should tell some people, like it seems like Boaz was explaining to whoever he was talking to, hey, just don't say that a woman was here. Obviously Naomi knows what's going on. Obviously they're going to go talk to this guy the next day about what's going on. So they were not trying to hide it. They were just trying to be discerning. They don't need to run around and explain themselves to everyone yet, because it might not be for anything. Ruth might marry the other guy. We don't know. So why make a big fuss about it just to then be like, oh, well, that's awkward. I guess they're not getting married now. So that would make sense as to why he's trying to be wise. He's trying to not just run around and have a bunch of gossip happen before anything actually happens as far as marriage goes. I think it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, he's trying to protect her again, like normal. He did want Ruth to know he was interested in her though, which is why he told her, yes, I'm down. There you go. Okay, any questions on 14? Oh, my throat hurts. We're almost done. Okay. There's a little thing I wanted to note. When she went home, I just think it's funny that Boaz never sends her home without food. He's very serious about making sure that she's well fed. And Naomi. And so when she gets home, Ruth says to Naomi, he said, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. It's just kind of cute. Like, I just love that Boaz is continuously providing not just for Ruth, but for Naomi too. He always sends her back with food for Naomi. It's very sweet, I think. But then we get to verse 18, the very last verse in the chapter. Naomi replies to Ruth to wait. Don't do anything, essentially. Just kind of hang tight until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but settle the matter today. Okay, what does she mean by that? The question is, how does she know Boaz thinks this way? Is Boaz thinking about Ruth so much that he's distracted? That's cute, but no. It just means that, yeah, Boaz is interested. It was kind of implied for a while. And if Ruth just explained all that had happened, it says, then she told her all the man had done for her. Naomi knows, oh, wow, he said yes. He's interested. Okay, this is awesome. We got to figure out what's going on. So, Ruth, hang tight. Don't worry. Don't do anything yet. It's very clear Boaz takes this seriously, and he will not forget about the matter. He won't just go on his business. He will make sure that today it's taken care of. He will go find that guy. They will have a conversation, whatever it is. Boaz will make sure that you will have a redeemer by the end of the day, basically, is what she's saying. He will take care of the matter. So it's not distracted. He's very focused, actually. He's very focused on figuring out what's going to go on, if he gets to marry Ruth, or if this other guy is going to marry Ruth, and that she's going to be provided for by him. So that's essentially the end of that. If there are any other questions about chapter 3, now would be the time to ask. The next, we are going to finish the book. The next time we have chapter 4, and there are some questions. What I would really like you guys to do, even just as you're reading, if you read it again or as you're reading chapter 4, just start thinking about the ways that Boaz being a redeemer for Ruth, or even desiring to be a redeemer for Ruth, might reflect Jesus being a redeemer for us. So, okay. Why would Ruth want to go with Boaz even though he's a little bit older? We did actually talk about that. So if you want to go back into the video and watch again where we answered question on verse 5. So is Ruth doing this to honor Naomi? I can briefly explain. real quick again, that it had to do with his character. She would want to be with someone who's going to have godly character and provide for her in a way that will give her the most fulfilling life. So there you go. Can we go over 11 just a little? Okay, so Emily helped out with that. The only way he can give her permanent help. Yeah, that's true. Yes. Thank you for that, you guys. I appreciate that. So, Emily, I think you asked about verse 5. I kind of went on a long rant about that earlier in the video. I don't know if someone else wants to put in the text what you guys wrote for number 5. I'm okay with that. If you guys want to share some input from that, just don't copy and paste each other's answers. But yeah, he had good godly character, and she wanted to be with someone like that. Are we submitting these notes under the same thing we first submitted? Are you public? Yeah, no, right? The second that this is done, I said this in the beginning of the video, but maybe you weren't there yet. There is going to be a new assignment to publish these notes, so you don't have to worry about your old assignment. I don't want you to have to figure that out. It's already graded. It's already done. It was out of 10 points. And so I've already gone through that. So right when this is done, I'm going to go on Schoology and make an assignment where you will submit these notes to that. It's already in a Google Doc. You've already copied and pasted it. Please submit it to Schoology, not with Pages, not with something else. Use Google Docs, and it will not be due until Friday at 3 p.m. But most of you guys are done probably after this. So, any last questions on this assignment? And hopefully Chapter 3 makes more sense now. I hope. Yeah, my throat hurts from talking so much. Jeez. Not used to this. Been a while. All right. If you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to close this out. Thank you guys for so many of you all joining. I appreciate it very much. And hopefully Ruth makes more sense now. Yay. All right.